12 are appointed by the bankers. 12 out of 19 means the bankers control. All of it is owned by the bankers. The private businesses own the whole Federal Reserve. They have printed money, pieces of paper, in which they have spent as real money, in which they put up nothing for, right? I got my wallet a $3 bill. People say, you got a $3 bill? Yeah. Printed not by the Federal Reserve, but that's all right. It's the same backing behind this $3 bill as there is this $20 bill. They're both redeemable in the same thing. They're both claims on the same thing. Nothing. By the way, we had an interesting little court case up in Minnesota here last year. That's just me. I'll put it here. I got to move this transmitter around to find a nice place for it because you radiate, I radiate different sorts of electrical, whatever it is, causes all sorts of things happening. Here we have last year up in Minnesota, for an example, a little problem. A man was caught printing up $20 bills. He was brought into court and charged with a crime called counterfeiting. He said, wait a minute, I didn't counterfeit anything. Counterfeiting is printing money. I didn't print any money. I printed pieces of paper. They said they look like Federal Reserve notes. He said the Federal Reserve is a private company. They print pieces of paper with no backing. They promise to redeem it in nothing. I promise to redeem mine in exactly what they promised to redeem theirs in. Now, fraud is if I print a claim on something and don't, a false claim. I didn't claim to redeem it in anything, so no fraud was involved. They said, well, people gave you things with those $20 bills. Well, if people want to give me something for nothing, that's pretty stupid on their part. And he said, besides, I didn't print money at all. Money under the law of the United States is greenbacks issued in the Civil War and gold and silver coin. I didn't make any greenbacks or any gold and silver coin. These are not money, they're Federal Reserve notes. Federal Reserve is a private company. Now, I'd break a law if they're copyrighted, but I don't see a copyright on the bill anywhere. Seeing there's no copyright, I didn't break a copyright law. Now, if they'd copyright the Federal Reserve notes, then I'd break a law. And they said, well, you're destroying society. He said, that can't be true. You tell us when there's unemployment, we have to increase the money supply to relieve unemployment. We have unemployment. I'm helping to release the money. The Federal Reserve says they're printing money with no backing to help out unemployed people. I'm helping them out. I'm doing exactly what they're doing. If what I'm doing is wrong, then they're doing the same wrong. You cannot accuse me of any crime they aren't committing. He was acquitted before a jury. By the way, under law, there's no other decision that could be made. He did not print money. It is not money. It is federal, private, corporation pieces of paper. And there's no reason why any one of us can't print that same pieces of paper. There's no law of this land that gives a monopoly to the Federal Reserve or a private company to print pieces of paper called money. Now, if the Federal Reserve redeemed them in gold, then he'd be making a false claim on the gold, wouldn't he? Then there would be fraud involved. He'd made a false claim, a false note on something. Here is an attorney. In fact, the former district attorney of the state of Los Angeles County, he went into a Federal Reserve bank, and he said, I have a $50 bill. I want $50. So they counted them out some ones, and he said, no, those are notes. I want the dollars. They said, what do you mean? He says, it says here, they're dollars. Now, this is a note. A note is a claim on dollars. I want the dollars that this is a claim on. They said, we don't have any dollars. He said, in other words, you wrote a false claim. You claim to give me $50. I don't know what a dollar is, but whatever it is, I want 50 of them. This is a note. This is a claim on $50. Where are my dollars? I'm making my claim. Well, we don't have any dollars. You mean you got this whole big place printing out all these things, claiming on dollars that don't exist? That's fraud. Any person who would do that would be thrown in jail for grand larceny. It is fraud. It is one of the biggest theft jobs ever pulled over. It makes the big London bank robbery nothing. It's the biggest con game of all. By the way, who owns the two biggest banks in New York, which controls the Federal Reserve? Rockefeller, Chase Manhattan, and New York City Bank, both Rockefeller. William Rockefeller bought New York City Bank in 1904, and John D. Rockefeller bought Chase Manhattan Bank in 1904. And then they pushed through a Federal Reserve Act to give them a monopoly in printing money. Hey, clever. That's how you get rich, isn't it? But how do you keep the num-nums from figuring it out? Of the 10 largest schools of education in the United States, for the last 50 years have received over half their total endowments from the Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundations. Aha! You teach the teachers how wonderful it is to have a Federal Reserve and to teach all the num-nums. How else do you get rid of a con job? You can't con a person unless you get the person to believe that what you're doing is good for him. Isn't that what a con artist does? He makes you believe that what he is doing is wonderful for you. How do you do that? You con them. How do you con them? You control their information. That's what a con artist does. He controls your information. If he can control your information, he cheats you. Any time that schools control your information, and the con artists not only control the schools of education, but they also built a little organization called the Council of Foreign Relations, Rockefeller and other money. In 1919, two cousins of Rockefeller called John Foster and Allen Dulles, along with Christian Herter, another member of the Rockefeller Group and an employee at the time of Rockefeller, founded a little organization called the Council of Foreign Relations, which has some very interesting members, like Thomas Dewey, Harry Truman, Dwight David Eisenhower, Adlai Stevenson, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, Richard Milhouse Nixon, Hubert Horatio Humphrey. Tweedle-lick or Tweedle-Dumphrey. You can have your choice. You go down and have your little election, don't you? Isn't that a lot of fun? Well, we have more fun than that. Let's watch some else. Every Secretary of State since James Barnes, since the Second World War, member of the CFR. Every president of the Federal Reserve Bank, CFR. Hey, that's pretty interesting, isn't it? We can go on with that, but let's leave that just a few minutes. Where did Nixon live the 4 years before he was president? He lived in an apartment building in New York where he had a $100,000 apartment that covered a full floor. Who was the owner of the building? Nelson Rockefeller. And he didn't pay any interest. By the way, he belonged to a law firm. He never did any work. He was out politicking. But the law firm's major client was a company called Standard Oil. He was on Rockefeller's payroll. Who financed this campaign? To who? Against whom? Rockefeller. And Rockefeller takes a dive, and Nixon had to beat somebody, see? Now, one way to make sure he beats somebody and wins is to make sure you control the other person. Nothing like election where you control both people. That lets the num-nums think that they're running the show. Ask yourself a question. Do you think the people in the United States would vote for ADC? Now, when we subsidize cotton growth, what do we want? We know we're going to get more cotton. When you subsidize any industry, what do you get? You increase output. Isn't that what subsidy does? Increase output? Now, we pay women for having illegitimate children, and the more illegitimate children they get, the more money they get. Do they have more or less illegitimate children? See, just use your own head. Now, second thing is, then we turn around and say the slums are caused by families without fathers and these broken homes, right? ADC children are breeding our slums. That's what we're told. And we got pouring money in the poverty program and the urban redevelopment because of these terrible families without fathers. While we pay women not to have husbands. If they got a husband, they don't get the money. We pay for immorality, don't we? And for broken homes. Now, we do another thing. Last year, our government spent millions and millions of dollars fighting cigarette smoking, didn't they? Last year, we gave $600 million to tobacco growers to subsidize tobacco. Our schools sit there and tell us about the population explosion while we pay women to have children. Suspicious, see? I wonder what the real motive is. In fact, everything we get is an absolute absurdity. The people who hate our flag, hate our country, hate our Constitution were trained on government schools. I teach at a school that never taken a penny of any government money. Totally private money. We don't even take any church money. No denomination money. We say, no man can be a teacher or woman if you're not living off your teaching, which means that your customers pay you voluntarily, like selling any other product. How can I be a teacher and talk about academic freedom and then demand my pay regardless of what I teach? I'm not talking about academic freedom. I'm talking about stealing. If what I'm teaching is worthwhile, it should sell in the marketplace. If it won't sell in the marketplace, it shouldn't happen. There's no reason for teaching that won't sell in the marketplace. Any teacher who's afraid to put what they're teaching up on the marketplace in the free market is a fraud and a charlatan. I like that. You know what happens at Bob Jones University if I'm teaching what the parents don't like? I don't get kids in my classes. You know, Dr. Bob won't keep me with any tenure. Dr. Bob will fire me that fast. Why? He's got to run that school off of tuitions coming from parents. By the way, we run our whole school on tuitions. How do you like that? You go and take a look at Northwestern. Tuition alone, $2,900. We run room, board, and tuition, $1,705. The average state school runs $9,000 per student. State money, endowment money, room, board, and tuition paid by the parents. Comes to $9,000. We run at $1,700. You talk about we need government schools because we can't afford private schools? Hogwash. We can't afford government schools. Look at the most expensive education is government education. Fantastically expensive. The second thing is, it is not education. It is indoctrination in the worship of the state. You won't get both ideas. They say, oh, down Bob Jones, you don't get both ideas either. No, we don't. You've already got the other one. We can't keep it away from you. We give you the side you never hear. That's how you get educated. We give you that which is not tolerated in a state school. The information that they don't dare teach. Now ask yourself a question. Why do the government schools turn off the revolutionaries? They should be the most loyal, patriotic. We have on our campus patriotic kids who love our country, respect the police, believe in morality, believe in law and order, believe in all of the traditional things of this nation, and we don't get any government money. Hey, isn't that peculiar? Do you ever think about that? That the private schools are patriotic and the government schools aren't? Well, we'll show you some reasons for that a little later. Well, let's take a look at political science. I'm going to try to cover a whole field of political science in about half an hour. We'll cover at least 4 years worth of college political science. Shouldn't be any difficulty. Oh, by the way, this is the 4 years you won't get at Ohio State. You can't get this education there. You can go there and pay $20,000 and you can't get what I'm going to tell you in the next 25 minutes. I didn't get it in my 11 years of college either. I thunk it out myself. Oh, by the way, we're taught today that you can't trust your own thinking. We must listen to experts. Watch this. People come up and say, can you document that statement? In other words, can I find someone else who agrees with me? There's nothing I can say that I can't find somebody who agrees with me. Every lie conceivable to the mind of man is in print. There is no idiocy I cannot document. In addition, I can find you 100 times more documentation for idiocy than I can for intelligence. Third, lies are easier to document than truths. Fourth, people today say, look at the documentation. That makes it true, doesn't it? We teach kids in debate, document, 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 and they win debates on documentation, don't they? All I say is that they've worked harder finding more liars. I quote another liar, that doesn't make my statement true. Or I quote 100 liars, it's no truer. Truth today is based on how many liars you can quote. In addition, any person who thinks on their own is considered unsophisticated. You're uneducated. So you go to school believing in anything, and what do? They work on you to show you that everything you believe in is not true. Then when you know that there's nothing that is true, you are now sophisticated and educated. They give you a degree. If you believe in anything for sure, you're considered kind of a dummy and a bumpkin. You have to believe in nothing to be educated. You have to know that you know nothing to be educated. If you know anything, then you kind of watch here. See that? That's a table. No, that's not a table. Table's a concept. Table's a word. This is an object with tableness. Isn't that brilliant? Educated. See, a 5-year-old wouldn't figure that out. He would think it was a table. Now, what can I say about that table? Well, I can say the length and the hardness and this and that, but that isn't the table I really see. I'm seeing atoms, and I'm seeing electrons, all of which I can't even know whether they're really there. And they're all in motion. I can't even tell the length or height or width, and I'm not sure about anything about this table anyway. Why? I don't know whether the table's there or not. Why don't I know whether the table's there or not? I don't know whether I'm here or not. You see, by logic, I cannot prove my own existence. Seeing I cannot prove I'm here, seeing the table, how do I know the table is there that I'm seeing? Therefore, anything I say about the table is only tentative. Hey, boy, you see how brilliant I'm getting? I'm getting educated. Now, when I know I don't know anything about the table, then I go on knowing nothing about something else. And when I end up knowing nothing about anything, I am now educated. And when I can prove it to other people, I'm called a teacher, and I'm certificated. I get an M1A, 1B stamp, government inspected and approved, stamped on me, boom, ready to go out and indoctrinate others. Now notice, I'm a good teacher if I teach the kids exactly what I was taught. In other words, if I'm a perfect tape recorder, I feed it in here, feed it out there, right? And now I'm a watch our school. We teach you the kiddies, here's your textbook, you read the textbook, and you put it on the exam, right? The person who does the best thing of putting what's in a book on the exam, he gets the highest grade, right? Is it smart? What do? We teach them not to think. Well, your own thinking is going to confuse you and getting it right on the exam. The best thing to do is take it right off of here and put it in there. The best people who can do that without thinking are educated. If you would question this, you're going to have a little problem on that exam. What do? By conditioned response, we train kids not to think. Don't trust your own reason. Don't trust the obvious. Don't trust the fact that our government is fighting a war undeclared. At the same time, they keep aiding the enemy. At the same time, we're negotiating. We now have 136 meetings in Paris, and we decided the shape of the table. Don't think of these things. You've got to take this stuff serious, you see. For an example, you go to a play, and there's some actors on the stage. There's Mr. Black Hat, and there's Mr. White Hat, Mr. Goody Two-Shoes. He's our hero, right? Everybody in that play has a part. They're either on Two-Shoe side or on Mr. Black Hat side, right? And there's a plot. And you're here, you bought the tickets, you sit here and watch this, and you're supposed to think it's real. You're supposed to become involved and really follow this, isn't it? Okay? This is called good theater. The more real you think it is, the better theater it is, isn't it? Right? Now, notice, Mr. Black Hat's script and Mr. White Hat's script is written by the same man. One man pays both guys. They're not really enemies. It's only on the stage for you. Afterwards, they're good friends. They happen to be real good buddies, right? But they get out there and they put on this show for you. It's called theater. Look at Vietnam. One side is paying both sides. The script is the same script as in Korea. The show is not for real. No one's trying to win the thing. No one's trying to lose it. It's there for you, the audience. Who pays the bill? The audience. It's called theater of war. We don't declare it? Why? Then we'd have to win it. Can't do that. Why? We paid for the enemy. Why do we keep paying the enemy? No communist nation's ever had an economic surplus. You can't fight war without an economic surplus. If we won't pay, they won't fight. How do you keep this idiocy going? Watch. You teach the kiddies at the little school to go out and march against the war in Vietnam. Why? Lenin told us this. To get the num-nums to do what you want them to do, appear to be against what you're really for, then dress up filthy, act filthy, be filthy. So what? The average person goes against what you say you're for and go for what you say you're against. You can get the num-num to do exactly what you want them to do. How do you get the American people to support this crazy war in Vietnam? Put peaceniks out there. Now, if I was a true peacenik, I'd try to dress up and be respectable and try to convince people by my example to follow me, wouldn't I? Oh, no. They go out by their very actions to become repulsive in every way. In mind, in appearance, in speech, in hygiene, so that the average decent citizen wants nothing to do with them. Why? How else can Nixon get support behind his war policy? The peacenik is the number one warnik. Only he doesn't know it because he's been down to the brainwashing center, the brain laundry, and he's had his mind cleansed from all reason. And in fact, if he reasons at all, he thinks of himself as stupid. I've been thinking, oh, how shameful. We can't use logic. We got to believe the party line, party form, right? Otherwise, we're not going to have solidarity. How are we going to win for the proletariat? And how are these people in the Cadillacs that are directing us going to win the war? A man named Richard Krebs was one of the top men in the communist operation in Germany back in the 20s and 30s. He was head of the Maritime Division and the head of the Red Marines in Germany and the violent squads. He had a run for it after in about 1936-37 because he was seen to be working for two people at once. And both the communists and Hitler got mad at him, and they're both trying to kill him. Well, he ended up here in this country, and he wrote a book called Out of the Night under the name Jean Valtin. Anyway, it seems that one thing about the rank and file and he, even in the 20s and 30s, is the fact that all the leaders of the Communist Party were wealthy aristocrats. But their belief, the rank and file, was this: once we have the Soviet Germany, we'll wipe these people out, see? He's believing that they were running the show. All Marxist revolutions have always been led by the wealthy. Fidel Castro is from the wealthiest family in Cuba. Trudeau up here, hardcore communist, always went to school in a Rolls Royce with his chauffeur as a school kid, up from the gutter. The boys leading the show are never poor. They are the economic elite, and always have been, including the financing of Marx and Engels back in writing the manifesto. They belong to an organization made up of only blue blood in the aristocracy in Germany called the League of Just, which hired them to rewrite Adam Weishaupt's work into what we call a Communist Manifesto. And to show you the fact, Marx was so unimportant that his name never even appeared in the manifesto until 1868, 20 years after its publication. That's how unimportant the hack journalist they hired for the job was. Anyway, getting back to political science, which we do get to sooner or later. At the University of Michigan, in the political science department, they teach that there are 256 different forms of government, none of which are a republic, which is interesting. I've only got 5. I think 5 include all forms of government possible. Monarchy, rule by one. One, archy, rule. Ali is few. Archy, rule of the few, the elite, the clique, the aristocracy, the nobility, the few ruling the many. Minority rule. If you want to use any of those names, they can be interchanged with no difficulty. Third, demosocracy. Demos means mob, the rule of the mob. By the way, some people here will say that's not right. Demos means people. Yes, it does. But people working as a mob. Majority of the people working together. Majority rule is another name for it. But it is a majority of people working together is a mob. That is, working in concert. A large group of people working in concert with like mind is a mob. The Greeks didn't have a special word for mob, but the word demos has all the kind of the meanings of our word mob. But if you want and say I'm unfair, throw it out. And we'll just call it majority rule. By the way, it means the same thing. But if it makes you feel better, okay? I'll prove it doesn't make any difference. By the way, a lynch mob is a perfect democracy. The majority want to hang the guy. The minority doesn't want to get hung. They have an election. And after the election, the majority rolls. You see, what's right and wrong is not based on morals, but on number, isn't it? That means if we can get a majority of the people want to steal, stealing becomes moral, doesn't it? There is no hideous crime that cannot become quite proper in a democracy. All we have to do is get a majority of the people to be sinners. There's a problem. Everybody's a sinner. Now you got a problem. Democracy means we have only sin legalized. By the way, as we have more democracy, we legalize more sin. Interesting. Republic. The law rules. Wait a minute. Who does the law rule? The people? No. The law rules the rulers. Our Constitution is not a law of the land. It's not a law of the people. It tells the government what to keep their cotton picking hands out of. It is the government that is ruled under a republic. The government is limited in its power. That is, it's restricted. That is, it's ruled. And the law rules the government. Notice we have the People's Democratic Republic of. 1, never have the people ever brought in communism. 2, democratic. There is no democracy, or never has been, of the majority ruling any communist nation. A small clique rules. One party of small number, working as a complete aristocracy, rules. Republic. There has never been a limitation on the power of that aristocracy. A republic means limitation of government. But remember what Lenin said? Always say the direct opposite of the truth. Appear to be for what you're against and against what you're for. By the direct opposite of the truth, the num-nums don't catch on. If you shade the truth, that's what most people do when they lie, people know that you're lying. But if you say the direct opposite and say it long enough, pretty soon they believe it because they can't understand it. You say only absolute total contradictions and absurdities. It's called the principle of direct reversal. Anyway, the communist nations are never peoples, never democratic, and never republics. That's why they use the People's Democratic Republic of. Why? It's direct reversal of all truth, of political science, and all knowledge. And by the way, Marx lays this down as a very basic principle. We must completely reverse all the principles. Peace must mean the opposite. Peace, that is anything that is peaceful, is anything that's doing away with conflict, that is exterminating all opposition. So anything that exterminates opposition is peaceful. No matter how many people you, if they're opposition, that's peaceful. I like that for definition. When the communist Chinese put the people in trenches, when they bury them up to their necks until the blood goes up and sticks the spike in while the blood shoots, while they sit and exterminate by the people, by the tens of millions of people, while in the Soviet Union, alone in the Ukraine, some 20 million people disappeared. This is not murder. We're only cleansing society. You see, society is a body organism, and the human being is only a cell in society. If you had cancerous cells, conflicting cells, wouldn't you as a surgeon cut out those conflicting cells to make the body whole? We're only cutting out conflicting cells when we exterminate 100 to 150 million people. These people are people with ideas conflicting with other people, and we're not going to have peace as long as they're around. We simply must cut out these cancerous cells from society so society is cleansed by all of us believing the same thing. Of course, you never always believe, or never can you get a society all believing the same thing, so you always must be cutting. They have so far, by acting as surgeons, cleansing society, killed more human beings by mass murders than all the soldiers killed in all the wars of all the nations, of all the world, for all recorded human history. But this isn't murder. This is only cleansing society. You have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. That's the logic Khrushchev gave us, isn't it? That mass murderer of the Ukraine, one of the top butchers of all time. He made Adolf Hitler look like a Sunday school teacher. But we'll get to Hitler later, too, because he was part of the conspiracy, too. I got some interesting pictures on that one. Anarchy, ruled by nobody, the absence of government, people living without government, no authority. Problem, when man lives in anarchy, he has to hide from everybody. Society can't exist. He lives in total chaos and constant fear. Problem with anarchy, and certain slave societies achieve this, is that you cannot have progress, economic progress. Why? If I produce more than I can eat right now, I have some property. With no law, my neighbor's going to kill me to get my property. I don't dare produce more than I can immediately consume. I must maintain poverty to stay alive. Wealth can only be accumulated when property can be protected. The Soviet Union protects property, their property. From whom? From the people. That's what the NKVD is for, to protect the property from the people. But if they don't protect their property, then property will be destroyed. And without property, the Soviet Union or any other country is just as poverty-stricken. They're back in a jungle. What is a jungle nation? A jungle nation is one that does not accumulate wealth. That's what we mean by savage society, isn't it? Why don't they accumulate wealth? To accumulate wealth is... That's like the story about the guy who saw the chief had this big chair. And he put the chair of his throne, that made him chief, wasn't it? And at night he put it on top. He had a wooden house and put it on the roof at night. And this guy says, boy, if I could get that chair, I'd be chief. I could be king if I get that chair. So one night he sneaks and takes that chair and takes down to his grass hut and he puts it up on his roof. And he gets inside and the chair comes through the roof and kills the guy. That shows you people live in grass houses shouldn't steal thrones. That's terrible. Oh, that's terrible. Anyway, anarchy is savagery. And any society that adopts anarchy immediately has savagery. Now, anarchy has been promoted. Hitler promoted anarchy. 100,000 a night being hauled in the streets, the students marching, the rioting, the burning, the overthrowing, the destruction of society, the progressives, the socialists, the red communist banner of Hitler, the red flag with the swastika on it, the National Socialist Deutsches Arbeiter Party, National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Proletarian Party of the nationalist movement. As he said, somebody asked him, are you a Bolshevik? He says, yes, but I'm a Bolshevik that knows how to make it work behind patriotism. Bolshevikism with patriotism. He says, these other num-nums over there in Russia, those dummies, they're trying to do it with a bayonet. I get them to carry my bayonets. Brilliant, huh? They did it through nationalism. Marxism through nationalism. And he did everything that the communists have advocated, including the extermination of those people who caused conflict. That's what the gas ovens were for. Right? All people who come up with this idea end up with gas ovens, or trenches, or machine guns, or some other sort of method of doing it. But the process is the same. You listen to Benita Aptheker, elected out here, communist on the Berkeley campus, and the daughter of the leading communist theoretician says, this nation, because we have more people conflicting, that is, more people with capitalist mentality, must see the greatest bloodbath in all of history. Clearly 1/3 of the American population must die once they seize power. Why? They got to cleanse society. And in this nation, if you take their logic, certainly at least 1/3 have to die. What? They're not murdering them. They're cleansing society. See how much they love mankind? Well, anyway, anarchy, Hitler didn't have the anarchy in the streets for the purpose of having anarchy. Anarchy is for the purpose of knowledge of one thing about people. When you have sufficient anarchy, that is riots, marches, there's no law and order, people living in fear in their homes, their property not protected, what will they do? They will turn to anybody who can give them law and order. Every political candidate today is promising what? Law and order. Why? The num-nums will vote for it. Why? Because we have disorder. Now, any person, you have law and order in the state penitentiary. It's loaded with law and order. You know why? The guards got the guns and the prisoners don't. They want to take away your guns to give you law and order. That does give you law and order. It's called a police state. The cemetery is peaceful. There's no conflict in the cemetery. You see, the way we're going to have law and order, and the only way you have law and order, is one of two things. Either we recognize a law and commonly agree to live by it, or it will be imposed upon us by a bayonet. Hitler knew that. When people have the chaos and the students are out marching with no respect of property, no respect of other people's rights, no respect of other people's lives, no respect for the law, what happens? You have chaos. And what happens when you get enough chaos? The people will demand a dictator. Example. Last year out in the state of Washington, you had the national ecology movement of the hardcore left. At the end of their meeting, these students meeting, they come up with a conclusion. What this nation needs is a benevolent dictator. The same week, down in Miami, Florida, the American Legion was holding their meeting. And you know what their conclusion was? The chaos and the troubles are so bad in this country, there's only one solution. A benevolent dictator. I've heard Christians say that, preachers. I've heard Birchers say that. I've heard workers say that. Laboring men, union men. I've heard businessmen say that. They don't care why you want a benevolent dictator. All they want you to do is want one. And there's one waiting to offer his services. Hitler knew what the people were going to demand. Law and order. What did he say? I'm bringing you their new order. Einreich, Einfurst, Einführer. one nation, one people, one leader. Me, Adolf. Why did they elect Hitler? Because they weren't safe in their homes, because the students were marching in the streets, because the rocks were being thrown, and the fires were in every town and village across the country. And the people were living in terror. The money was collapsing, and everything was in chaos. There was no stability, and people were believing every idiocy known. And he gave them law and order. Ein Reich, ein Volk, ein Führer. What do the people want in this country? One nation, one people, ein leader, ein Führer. By the way, the people creating the chaos are looking for a Führer. Now, some of them are so dumb not to know this. Some of them think they're going to be it. The problem is, there's tremendous competition in the Führer's business. 85% of the Bolsheviks fighting with Lenin died before Bolshevik firing squads. Practically every single person fighting with Castro in the Orient province died before Castro's firing squads. The only ones that lived are the ones that got out of the country fast. When you become Führer, you don't want other Führer-wanters around. And that's what a revolutionary is. He's one who wants power. Look, these people out leading these marches and movements, what are they looking for? Power. You can call it black power, student power, youth power, any power you want. Women's power. They want power. What do you mean power? Power and control over other people. Now, people seeking power have a funny thing. They generally don't care how they get it. My point is, whenever you meet an anarchist, you're meeting a person who's seeking power, not anarchy. And when he gets that power, he doesn't set up democracy. The people aren't going to do any ruling. It's going to be oligarchy. His clique and club is going to rule. Oh, the name changes. It may be called Divine Right of Kings. It might be called the National Socialist or the International Socialist. It might be called plantationism or the New Plantationism. But plantationism it is. We now want to have one big national plantation where everybody is given to accord to the deed, and everybody gets in the big mass accord to the ability on the one big national plantation where we can bounce our feet in the Mississippi mud. And that's what's being sold in our schools as progress. Who's teaching us that? The people who are looking to be dictators. You'll talk to a Marxist educator, and you look at what he's doing. When you cross him, look at the fury. You're crossing a natural leader and a man who's got a divine right to rule. You ever try that? Get in on one of these debates. Go on a college campus and start talking Birch Society and see how much tolerance they have of your ideas, and how fast you're shouted down, how fast they march on you, how fast they scream the oaths and don't let you talk. You watch. I've been at state schools where I've been invited to speak and paid to speak and come down, and they're locked arms out there, and nobody comes into that auditorium except the revolutionaries, and they line up for battle. They're not going to let the num-num come in and hear any common sense. He might think. They are very intolerant people. Nothing is intolerant as a liberal. The other view you will not hear in Ohio State University. You can go there and Jerry Rubin can talk about burning this country to the ground, killing your own fathers and mothers to become true revolutionaries, and everything else with his four-letter words. And he can take a collection, and did so after that talk. You try to preach Jesus Christ in Kent State University, you can't do so. And take a collection for God, not a penny. You'd be thrown in jail for breaching the state law. In our country, Beethoven couldn't teach piano in the state of Indiana. He's not certified. Inspected A number 1. Okay. He's got to have the indoctrination of the worship of the state. Doesn't he? Well, anyway, anarchy is nothing but a hot way to get oligarchy. Anarchists are looking to be oligarchists, not anarchists. No anarchist wants to be an anarchist. He wants to be an oligarchist. We had a few anarchists around, like a man named John Wilkes Booth, who gunned down a man named Abraham Lincoln, a man named Leon Calzez, who shot down President McKinley, a man named Lee Harvey Oswald with Robert Kennedy, or with John Kennedy, a Marxist, a member of the Young Marxist League, the Young Communist League, the W.E.B. Du Bois Club, Sirhan, gunned down Robert Kennedy, didn't they? They're very good for gunning down people. By the way, another Marxist anarchist who belonged to the same group as Leon Calzez was a man who opened fire and shot down an Archduke Ferdinand to bring on the First World War, which was planned by the conspiracy. Another Marxist anarchist connected with John Wilkes Booth in the same organization gunned down the Tsar of Russia, Alexander II, the man who supported the United States in the Civil War by sending the Russian fleet to the north and giving it and putting it in New York Harbor in San Francisco to prevent the breakup of this country as the conspirators wanted. We'll get into that a little later. But anarchists are very good for gunning people down, but they're never trying to make any republics. They're trying to make oligarchies. There's another way to have an oligarchy. It's called democracy. You play this little game by saying, if you go down and pull a little lever, you're really running the government. Ask the question. I'll bet you, for example, down in the capital of South Carolina, the governor, like most governors, has an annual Governor's Day conference. They invite the college student representatives of all the colleges in the state down, and they have the speakers in, you know, the same old gobbledygook we run conference. Well, every college is invited in South Carolina to send 20 students. And there were some 400 students there, so it must have been somewhere around 20 colleges sent their 20 students. And here they're talking about a whole afternoon of a panel discussing the wonders and virtues of foreign aid. And when this whole talk gets done, and these are students like any other college students, except for a group of people from Bob Jones who kind of stand out a little bit in that outfit. They're typical college students. One of them gets down, one of these Bob Jones students who, I don't know why, he just happened to be in my econ class, got up and asked the question. He said, I wonder how many other students agree with you. It took 20 minutes while the panel tried to stop any expression of the students' opinions. And stated that you asked of the panel, not of the students. And after 20 minutes of hassle, they finally were forced to take a vote. Do you know how many of the 400 agreed with the panel? One. I bet you get about the same vote in this country for foreign aid if we put it up for election. Put up foreign aid. Have people vote on it. I bet you couldn't get 1/4 of 1% voting for foreign aid. Yet we say we have a democracy, and our government represents us. Hogwash. Does this government represent us going to a war with undeclared in a nation we don't want to win and refuse and promise not to win? Our president gets on the radio and says we're going into Cambodia, and we went into Cambodia to take away privileged sanctuaries. I cannot in all conscience commit our troops to a position of privileged sanctuaries. And we must go in to take these privileged sanctuaries away from the communists. Sounded good. Listen to the next line. We promise, however, not to go more than 21 miles into Cambodia. He immediately declared a privileged sanctuary. Not only that, he told the enemy about it, which is, under Article 3, Section 3 of the Constitution, the highest crime possible in the land. Giving aid and comfort to the enemy. Last summer, I was out in Los Angeles about 3 or 4 times, but one night, Gary Allen came over, and Gary says, say, I got some fellows I want you to meet. And I said, okay, and we got in a car, middle of the night, we're driving around, you know, up in the mountains, we're going. We finally end up at a nice big spread up there, looking over, and somebody had a few bucks in his outfit, and it's the kind of place I like to go anyway. Well, I got in there, and the people were very nice and cordial, but it was all kind of a little social whatsoever. And I said, Gary, what's this about? And he said, there's a couple of people want to talk to you. Let's go into the library. So we get in there, and these 2 guys come in. They sit down, and I said, who are you fellas? You know, they wanted to talk about this. I said, I just want to know who I'm talking to. And he said, one says, well, I'm the vice president of one of the largest banks in California, and the other was the chief economist of the Bank of Hawaii. And the chief economist started rolling out a big, long roll. He said, Dr. Crane, I've been making a study. I've been working 6 months on this. And he said, you know something? The Federal Reserve has created every boom and bust and has created every upcycle and downcycle. The Federal Reserve creates the business cycle. I said, could you ever think of any other reason for a Federal Reserve but to create a business cycle? If I'm going to make money in the market, I got to know when it's going up and down. How do I know when it's going up and down? When I make it go up and down. If I know when it's going up and down, I got to win. Some people keep winning, other people keep losing. The winners know, the losers don't. That's simple. He says, you mean you knew this all the time? I said, I didn't need to make any big roll. Why else control the money supply? What causes the business cycle? You pick up every econ textbook and it goes on chapter after chapter about inventory fluctuations, right? And it talks about interest fluctuations, and it talks about all the causes of the business cycle of investments and savings and propensity to save, propensity to consume, and propensity, and all of it's hogwash. We have a tendency, whatever is saved is invested, and whatever's not saved is consumed. You can't change that little hog thing. If you don't spend it, it's saved. What is really the cause of business cycle? Increase and decrease of availability of credit. Who creates that? An artificial board makes it up on their own edict every Monday morning. Called the Open Market Committee. They decide the money for this week. Second, they do it in secret. They never tell you what they're doing. Now, some people know the secret. The other man said, yes, I want to tell you what happened to me. I was in our New York offices, and upstairs from us is Lehman Brothers, international bankers. One of the employees of Lehman Brothers is George Ball of our State Department, who also works for Lehman Brothers, and member of the CFR. He's having coffee, 10 o'clock in the morning, you know, and he says, I'm just having coffee, and George Ball comes in, sits down, we're talking, and George Ball says, your bank is out of the market, aren't they? And he says, no, why? The market's doing real well. George Ball says, you mean you don't know about Cambodia next week? The market fell on Cambodia bigger than any day since 1929. A huge fortune was picked up when they went into Cambodia. A fantastic fortune. And he said to me, some people know. And I said, sure, some people know. You don't think history happens. History is made. It is written. It's a script played out. He says, I'm frightened. I says, you got good reason. And now you see the picture. See? Okay. Well, this is the game we're kind of playing. A democracy is always a fraud. There is practically nothing our government is doing. Our president voted, look, 1916. The American people voted for Woodrow Wilson as president. What was his campaign? He kept us out of war. What did he do immediately after inauguration? He had war declared on Germany without a single act of war on the part of Germany, didn't he? The people just voted against war, and he put it in on the sinking of a British ship, the Lusitania. He said Americans were on board, but the German government had people on the gangplank warning every American, that's a British flag, that nation's at war. You cannot go up this gangplank, and we cannot protect you. You go at your own risk. For 2 months, the German government ran in every major newspaper in the United States ads saying we cannot protect the lives of Americans who sail on British ships. Yet we went to war over the sinking of the Lusitania. In 1940, Franklin Delano Roosevelt ran on a campaign, our boys shall not die on foreign shores. He took office on the 20th day of January, 1941. Less than 1 month later, the 19th day of February 1941, he declared war on Germany. He signed the Lend-Lease Act, which was an act of war under international law. To give munitions to a belligerent nation is an act of war. Hitler ignored it. So on March 1941, he declared war again. He ordered the United States military naval vessels to protect convoys to England on the high seas. May 1941, he issued this communication to all ships at sea. We are at war. Conduct yourself accordingly. Fire on the enemy flag on sight. Interesting enough, 24 hours later, Hitler ordered to all U-boat commanders, on the sight of the American flag, disengage. Do not even engage British ships in the sight of the American flag. In April 1941, the United States put detachments of the Pacific Fleet in Yokohama and Tokyo Bay. Unwelcome, uninvited, going in supposedly on a state visit, firing all guns in military battle salvos. November 1940, the United States broke the Japanese code. By October 1941, we knew the date, time, and place of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. 3 weeks before Pearl Harbor, or really about 2 months first, the Admiral of Pearl Harbor communicated to the Pentagon, I cannot defend Pearl Harbor against a 360-degree horizon. I ask permission to remove the fleet to San Francisco, where it can be adequately defended. He was removed, and Admiral Kimmel was sent out to take over his command. Admiral Kimmel immediately notified the Pentagon. After inspection of his position, he says, I cannot defend the 360-degree horizon of Pearl Harbor. I ask permission to remove the fleet. He was ordered to keep the fleet in Pearl. 1 week before Pearl Harbor, the head of the Navy, Secretary of the Navy, the Secretary of the Army, and the Chief of Staff, George Catlett Marshall, had in their hands a communication from the Australian government giving them the position and time of the attack on Pearl Harbor. George Catlett Marshall took the communication. He says, I will see that it's communicated to Admiral Kimmel. The naval admiral said, I can communicate it in 7 seconds by naval radio. Marshall says, I will see that he gets it. He did. He sent it Western Union on December 10th, 10 days later, arriving 2 days after Pearl Harbor. You know who was court-martialed for Pearl Harbor? You guessed it, Admiral Kimmel. A day of infamy, and it was. The question was, whose infamy? Our boys fought the Second World War for one thing, we were told. The independence and liberty of the small nations of Eastern Europe, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. This is what our boys were dying all over the world for, weren't they? That's why we went to war for, wasn't it? To protect the liberty of the Eastern European nations. What did we do when the war was over? Without a shot being fired, we turned them over to the worst imperialistic slave empire the world has ever known. In addition to that, the United States government has backed the communist regime of every communist takeover in history. In 1917, the President of the United States, I won't name his name, gave direct aid to a man named Leon Borenstein, you'll know as Leon Trotsky, who was trained at Standard Oil's property, his army in New Jersey, who was financed by big money from New York, who was arrested in Canada while he's on his way to Russia to become head of the Red Army. And it was our White House that got his release and the money given to him, back to him, to go on to Russia to have a revolt against our ally, Russia, which was our ally fighting Germany, so that more Americans could be killed on the Eastern Front or on the Western Front, as Germany could take her armies out of Russia after the signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk by Lenin. Lenin was financed by a man named Jacob Schiff of Kuhn and Loeb. The money was shipped through a man named Paul Warburg, head of the Federal Reserve, to his brother, who was head of German Secret Service, Max Warburg, also head of the Bank of Warburg in Frankfurt, who financed Lenin, got him out of Switzerland, and put him into St. Petersburg. He was financed out of New York City by Milner and Morgan, and Jacob Schiff money transferred by to one of the founders of our Federal Reserve, Paul Warburg, and his brother Max of the German Secret Service. In addition, in 1933, when Russia was collapsing in a financial collapse and the counter-revolution, Stalin didn't have a way of prayer of preserving his power. We granted recognition, extended credit, and gave him unlimited checks in order to support the Soviet Union in its hour of crisis. In 1940, we rushed again to support the Soviet Union, and then welcomed all their agents into this country as great allies, and made communism an acceptable thing in our colleges and universities. In 1945, after we promised Chiang Kai-shek if he would open up an offensive against Japan without Mao Tse-tung's assistance, we would protect him from Mao Tse-tung with every last dollar of Americans' money and every last drop of Americans' blood. We then put an embargo against shipping of any arms or even sail to Chiang Kai-shek. While we continued a war 5 months after Japan surrendered unconditionally in March 1945, we continued a war because Russia had to get her army out of Europe across a one-track railroad into the Far East to seize Manchurian arms in order to arm a man named Mao Tse-tung with the Japanese arms. Not only that, We dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan after the war, after Japan had unconditionally surrendered months ahead of time. Why did we drop those atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Did we drop them in order to end the war? No. We could have done that by dropping them 25 miles out at sea and say, take a look. They're going to get 10 miles closer every day. That would have ended the war just as quick, wouldn't it? Why did we drop it on human beings? Very simple. How else are you going to get the pictures to show the little kiddies and talk about nuclear holocaust and fallout to get them to believe in surrendering there? That atomic bomb is dropped every day on Americans. It's dropped on radio and television. It's dropped in the classroom textbooks and the weekly readers. We're told this thing, in case of all-out war, no side can win. I'm going to tell you something. We are in all-out war, and one side is going to win. See, the basic philosophy of our foreign policy is in error. The basic policy is that we don't dare have war with our enemy. The problem is that, as the communists say themselves, they are in all-out war. One side will win and one side will lose. The American people have been believing a myth that we got to avoid war. We are in total war. The first real total war mankind has ever known. And I want to tell you something else. One side will win. That's an interesting thought, isn't it? Okay. While we're given that piece of malarkey from our leaders, which is the very philosophy needed to surrender, as General Lee of China said hundreds of years ago, the supreme act of warfare is not defeating your enemies, but destroy their willingness to fight. Let's go back and take a look at Rome. I'm going to give you a very interesting little parallel here. You ever think of Hannibal? Where did Hannibal come from? Well, we're told Hannibal came from Carthage. No, Hannibal has never been in Carthage since the age of 5. He was a ruler of a country called Spain, now called Spain, Iber at the time. He came out of Spain with his armies, went over the Alps, and we were told that he won his victories in battles with elephants. Half his elephants died in the Alps, and the others didn't survive 6 months, yet he was in Italy for only 20 years. For 20 years, he had no supply, 19 years, no supplies or reinforcements from Carthage or Spain. He lived off the land and lost more than 100% of his troops every 2 years while in Italy. He replenished his supplies and his troops in the enemy territory. Isn't that interesting? Might have been a Lend-Lease program. Foreign aid, huh? An interesting thing. When Hannibal won his great victory at Cannae, he could have gone to Rome and had it, but he didn't march for 3 days. But there was a man in Rome called Quintus Fabius Maximus, the great delayer, who said, never defeat your enemies. Your enemies, or Shakespeare said, King Henry IV, busy giddy minds with foreign quarrels as the way to power. As Quintus Fabius Maximus was destroying the Republic of Rome, what did he do? He kept telling the people, no Roman dare sleep while Hannibal yet lives. The atomic bomb of 200 BC. Hannibal. The scourge. Every child feared and trembled. And he needed more power to protect the people from Hannibal. Yet Hannibal rolled around, and it was interesting, they talk about in the history books, his psychological warfare. He burned and looted other people's farms, but never touched the senator's farm. And they said, what brilliant psychological warfare. I wonder whether the senators just asked him not to do so. It's interesting that under the threat of an enemy who threatened Rome all of these years, while the Roman legions outnumbered him 10 and 20 to 1, no Roman legion after the Battle of Cannae was allowed to engage Hannibal without permission of the Senate. Our planes are not allowed to bomb convoys without permission direct from the Pentagon for every single strike. We can't bomb the Standard Oil refineries in Hanoi. We can't bomb the dikes. We cannot bomb the dredge that keeps the Haiphong River open. We cannot bomb any. We've dropped more bombs on North Vietnam than we dropped in Germany in the whole Second World War. Yet we leveled a modern nation in the Second World War, and we haven't hit a thing except one day they reported in the press, I think it might have been a typical graphical error, that the day our B-52s bombed suspected jungles. We've been plowing the countryside with high explosives at fantastic cost to you and me in a phony charade as Hannibal for 20 years roamed in Italy. But you know there was a problem in Italy. They had a guy named General Douglas MacArthur Scipio Africanus. Now this guy was a young fellow, and he was a senator, and he'd say, fellas, I got an idea. What's your idea, Scipio? I know how to defeat Hannibal. Shut up, boy. Wait a minute. He's easy guy to beat. Carthage is undefendable. If we land an army at Carthage, he's got to come home. We'll have him in the desert, and we'll smash him. Shut up, boy. Well, look, he's such a great enemy, and I figured out how to win. Shut up, boy. When you want to blow a good thing? What do you think we're building Rome on? How do you think you're a senator, boy? What do you think made you, boy? Get smart, boy. Well, this guy just wasn't very smart. So they decided to get rid of the dummy, and they sent him off in charge of Japan. Sicily, a prison camp they had. They got rid of the guy, just kept him out of the country, just taking care of occupying this country they conquered called Sicily. And Scipio got a bright idea. He'd build an army in Sicily, and he'd build some ships. And he built this army, he built the ships without telling Rome. And he paddled away off to Africa and landed at Zama. You know, the historians are always confused, and you read any history book of Hannibal, about how did Hannibal get out of Italy, seeing by law his army was always surrounded by Roman legions, which had to always keep him in sight. How could he disengage his troops with no casualties? Why didn't the legions strike at him when he was half embarked and the other half were on the shore? How could he disengage his entire army and return totally intact to Zama without the Roman legions in Italy giving him any trouble? By the way, he was only 26 when he went into Italy. He was only 46 when he returned to Africa. At Zama, Hannibal lost. Scipio smashed him. Only 5 men rode out of Zama. One of them was Hannibal. Hannibal, the next year, after the Roman victory at Zama and the destruction of the Carthaginian army, where do we find Hannibal? Under Roman rule? He's a member of the Carthaginian Senate. Isn't that interesting? A year later, because you've got to have an enemy, Hannibal rides out of Carthage, out into the deserts, and raises an army in the Middle East, over in Syria, and in what is then called Troy, and or Philistine, or excuse me, what do you call it? Phoenicia, which is from old Philistia. He raises 10 ships and sails against the Roman Armada. Then he raises an army, and he keeps fighting for 20 more years. At 66 years of age, Hannibal draws his sword on the Black Sea and says, "So Romans can sleep," and commit suicide. The Romans were never going to kill him. They needed the A-bomb of the day. What happened during this period? The Fabians, the people who believed in democracy, changing the republic to democracy and taking power by gradual means and by using a phony enemy as an excuse, destroyed the republic and set themselves up as demagogues and started a massive welfare program to support themselves until there was economic collapse as the majority of the people were on welfare and the people who were producing couldn't make money because their taxes were too great, and they joined the welfare rolls until pretty soon the welfare rolls were so big there wasn't enough food from the producers to feed them. And then riots started in the street. And then the senators told them, look, we've given you, what they'd done, they had promised the people that if they support their regime and keep them in power, that the people were not responsible to feed themselves and clothe themselves and house themselves. It was the state's responsibility to see that everybody was taken care of. Well, then one day there wasn't enough food, as taxes had to go higher and higher on the producers, you see, in order to support the non-producers, until the riots got into going in the streets. And they said, don't you know we love you? Haven't we taken care of you? And they said, it wasn't our responsibility to feed ourselves. It's your responsibility. We want bread or blood. Your blood. And the senators said, you love us, don't you? No, they didn't love them at all. The mob wanted their blood. And so the senators called in the army. The army was never allowed into Rome. And Scala was invited in to put down the rebellion, and Scala did. And when the Senate thanked Scala for saving Rome in our need, Scala said, I think you got the name wrong, bub. I got a new name. It's called Emperor. He had the army. You blew it, didn't you, huh? Well, now I'm going to show you how to do it. Clean up the town, boys. We're going to show them how the game's played. Then what happened in Rome? As Rome moved on to the democracy, as they moved on to the welfare program, and the people didn't work, this interesting thing happened to their people. The boys started becoming feminine. They started putting on jewelry and cosmetics and putting on pretty clothes rather than wearing masculine clothes. They started becoming feminine. Long hair is the woman's crown. They wouldn't fight. They started using orgies as their outlet. They become persified. The government kept spending money and ran out of silver, so they started making copper coins and dipping them in silver and passing them as silver coins. Did you know that? Can you imagine that the Roman government would do a thing like that? The men would not defend the country or fight on the borders. As the barbarians closed in on them, they became weak and emaciated, and all sorts of depravities and immorality ranked and destroyed Rome as it ate it out like cancer. What has happened to our nation? The Bible says a woman is to be in subjection to the man, and that the man is to be head of the home, and that the children are to have discipline, and he has responsibility. Our kids have been raised by Marxist Dr. Spock. Our parents have been raised who told us we're not to discipline the child or we'll spoil their spirit. We're to become their pals. Kids want direction from parents, and the parents have advocated to what? To the school. And the parents refuse to take the responsibility. It isn't easy to discipline a child that you love. But if you love a child, you chasten it. And if you don't love a child, you do not chasten it. And a parent who won't spend the money for the education but sends him down here to this heathen school, and he wonders why he loses that kid. Some of these kids were talking to me here in the coffee break, and they said, it's a parent's fault. And I said, amen. I'll tell you what happens. Every single homosexual, any psychiatrist will tell you this, a homosexual always comes from a home with a dominant female. Why? That's a perversion for a woman to dominate the home. Why? She hasn't got a man for a husband. And how is this kid supposed to rise up in a home where he's got a woman for a father? That's why the men are trying to dress like women and look like women and act like women, and you watch them. Even the good judges tell us this. You cut the long hair in a boy and he thinks different. Sure, he thinks different. He thinks masculine. And when he has long hair, he thinks feminine. You watch the feminine movements. I was just watching the waiter over at the hotel this morning with real long hair, and what was he doing? He started having feminine gestures, holding things feminine. They get their purses on, don't they? Now they're wearing purses. They're wearing flouncy flounces. A boy showed up in my class, and he had a ruffle on the front of his shirt. Come here. What's wrong? It's not male. You're to be a man and dress like it. And you get home and put on a man's shirt and come back here. Frills and ruffles are for women. They're to look pretty. Men are to be men, and women, women. We want unisex, so there's no conflict between sexes, the same as we want unireligion, atheism. We want everything, to where we have no differences. One day I had a couple girls, 3 of them. I found out they were girls after a while. They came into a restaurant up in Detroit. They were dressed in their Indian garb, in the regular savage outfit, dressed and smelling like savages. And it was about 1 in the morning, and they're sitting there, and they're talking to me, and they give me the barbers. I had my establishment clothes on. And, we were the only ones in the restaurant besides the guy cooking up the hamburgers. And they started in with their little jokes. And I said, can I ask you a question? And they said, yeah. I said, you believe in free love? Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure do. And I said, do you know what love is? We know what love is. No, I said, you know what sex is. Do you know what love is? And you tell us, mister. I'll tell you. Love is when some boy thinks you're so clean, so pure, so wonderful that he idolizes you. And He doesn't want to share you. He wants to possess you. He wants you to be his. When any boy passes you around, he's using you. And they sat there just quivering. And I said, now go over that mirror, look in, and ask yourself this question. Can any boy love me? You look like an easy mark, and you are one. You can be used as a pincushion by any guy who comes along, and he knows it. No guy loves a girl like that. And they sat there, and I said, free. At least the girls that did what you did when I was young, charged. They were a lot smarter than you are. I have more respect for a prostitute than a girl dumb enough to do it free. How dumb can you get? Where did you learn that? At school. People say we have to teach in school about sexual perversion and all sorts of homosexuality. Why? Well, so the kids will know what it is so they can avoid it. Oh, no. You cannot commit homosexuality until you know about it. It's not natural. I had a couple of men, 80 years old, millionaires, called me up one day and they said they want to have lunch with me. Well, it was a real nice place, and I bought the most expensive thing that I've made. I ate a real good meal, and I said, well, after the meal, I said, okay, fellas, what do you want? I mean, you're not blowing this money for kicks. And they're both sitting there like this, and they kept looking at each other. You ask him, Bill. No, you do with it. No, these two guys, 80 years old. Finally, one of them said to me, he says, what we want to know is, what is a homosexual? Now, they never became a homosexual. Why? They didn't even know about it. They couldn't. And I explained to them in terms as modestly as I could and still be graphic enough that they get the idea. And one looks at the other and he says, do you believe it? And he says, you're not serious. You mean people do that? And he says, yes. Oh, my Lord. Now, they never became a homosexual. I never could. I was 30 before I knew what a lesbian was. It never bothered me at all. In fact, I wouldn't be bothered today if I didn't know. It wouldn't hurt me at all. I had a psychologist come down a while back. He walked in my office and he says, 42 years old, PhD in psychology. And he says, Dr. Crane, before we start talking, I want to tell you something. Put it on fair grounds. There's two things in this world I hate vehemently. I said, what is that? And he says, Bob Jones University and the John Birch Society. I said, sit down. So we talked for 5 hours. I said, you pose the question, any subject you want. You take the subject, I'll pose the question, you give me your answer, I'll give you my answer. Then we'll analyze it and see which one's right. At the end of 4 hours, he's sitting there like this, and he comes up and he says, why are you always right? I said, I got a book that's never wrong. I can't lose. Guaranteed one. This guy says to me, he says, you're not doing a good job of education here. This is a perverted school. I pull up the blinds. I said, take a look at our kids. Well-dressed, happy, busy, know where they're going, lit up, turned on, having a great time. What's wrong with those kids? They're not getting a real education. I said, what aren't we teaching them? We're not teaching them how to smoke pot. We're not teaching them how to use narcotics. We're not teaching them how to go to bed with some guy. We're not teaching them how to smoke. Now, you tell us the problems with lung cancer, drug addiction, problems with venereal disease, problems of illegitimate children. You tell us all the problems society has. We don't have them. We've never had a girl get pregnant at Bob Jones University in 43 years. As long as the school's been open, we have 2,000 girls on campus. We have never had any lung cancer from smoking. We don't have any smoking. We've never had any kids get drunk and go out and have an automobile accident. Because if they have a beer, they're not there. Now, we don't have these sins, and you say we're not giving them an education. He says, well, they're going to find out of it down the street. You can't keep it from them. I said, sure, but they know where it came from. They know it's from the street. They're not going to have the sanction of the fact that we're endorsing it. Well, they're going to learn about sex. Yes, they are going to learn about sex. But we're not going to endorse illicit sex. We don't have any of the problems. You say you're out the cure. And you're saying we're not giving an education. We, for 40 years, never had a graduates get divorced. We have 4,300 kids on campus. Now you're telling us that we're not doing a good job. Let's see your ranking, see how you're doing. We'll beat you in everything. We always have and always will. And you know, that guy got so shook. He said, you have all these rules and regulations. What gives you the right to play God and put down these rules and regulations? I said, no, we don't. We don't play God. That's why we don't make the rules and regulations. Those rules and regulations were given by God. And we recognize that, and we don't play God. You're playing God by saying what they can and can't do. I'm not playing God at all. I'm just administering what God said. Now, there's a difference here. He says, there's got to be an answer to what you're saying. I said, yeah, there is an answer. But you've got to have a change of heart to understand it. I said, why'd you come in here? He said, I've been listening to your tapes for 24 hours. I said, getting to you, huh? Having a little trouble. I said, I can listen to your tapes and I won't come see you. I've heard all that garbage and it doesn't make sense. There's no reason to talk to you about it. There's a reason you're here. What I'm saying, you know is true. That's why it bugs you. You've been given stones for bread. It's starting to bother you. The thing is this, a republic is a government limited in power, but governors do not like their power limited. Governments want to extend their power. How do they do it? By overthrowing the law. That is, by saying we can decide what the law is. We can adjudicate it. As Earl Warren says, the Constitution is what we say it is. In other words, they are the law. In other words, there is no restraint on their power or action. They are the law. In other words, there is no limitation. What they're saying is the Constitution is a bad form of government. Why? It limits their power, and they don't want their power limited. Now I'm going to give you just some rules. I'm going to have some lunch. I hope we're going to have some lunch. Is that right? Is there some lunch around? Oh, yes. I got to read a little notice here. Notice says, on the back of your ticket, write your name, address, and phone number. You will need this ticket and your name on the back to eat. I mean, to get a noon meal. That's what it says.
Tell them that lunch is downstairs, and the Coke is over here, coffee's downstairs.
Okay, Coke is back here, coffee's downstairs, and lunch is downstairs.
Right, and will we have Pastor James Lee, president of the Fundamental Minister Scholarship, give the blessing now?
Okay, no, right when I get done, I got one more point to make, and then I'll call him. All right? But my point, I want to wrap up political science before lunch. And political science, I'm going to wrap up by giving you the laws of political science. How do you like that? I don't believe there's any relative at all. All things are absolute. How do you like that for being really out of it, huh? Now, they tell us all things are relative, but the problem is that that statement is an absolute statement. It says absolutely all things are relative. Now, that's an absolute contradiction right there. Absolutely all things can't be relative. And then you can't say, well, some things are relative, then you're saying the other things are absolute. I'm going to say all things are absolute. That's an absolute statement that all things are absolute. We may not be able to measure the absolute. We may not know what the absolute is, but there is an absolute. It's only our finite brain that's incapable of coming to it. And merely because we are not that bright, there's no reason to say it doesn't exist. I'm going to define now truth. Truth, and this is a liberal philosophy professor's definition, my own philosophy professor who was a Marxist, atheist, philosophy professor at Wayne State University, who was telling us 20 years ago to mount the barricades and overthrow this nation if we were going to be real students. He said the Jerry Rubin speech. And he said, truth is the absolute accurate portrayal of what always has been, is universally now, and always shall be. Man can never hope to know truth because he knows only an infinitesimal portion of the past, knows practically nothing of the present, and owes absolutely nothing of the future. Therefore, truth is impossible to man. Truth is tentative and relative. I agree with his definition of truth. However, I will expand. If truth, the only way anything could know the truth is if it knew all past, present, and future. If there was a mind that knew past, present, future, and that would have to recognize a mind greater than our own, and egotistical men that rotten character he is, doesn't want to recognize that, doesn't he? He wants to set himself up as the brightest thing that ever was. That's man's problem, isn't it? Anyway, he wants to say no such mind exists. If no such mind exists, he is right. Truth is impossible. For no matter of logic could ever find truth by logical deduction. We would have to have omnipotence and omnipresence. If there is such a mind, that mind would know truth. And the only way we can find out truth is for that mind to reveal it to us. Truth can only be conveyed by revelation and by no other means. If that mind does not exist, then truth is impossible. If that mind does exist, truth is possible. Jesus Christ did not say, I speak the truth, I'm telling you the truth, I'm not lying to you. He didn't say that. He said, I am the truth. I and truth are the same thing. Why? I know all past, present, and future. Now, he didn't say Satan is a liar. He says Satan is lie. He and lie are identity. All lies come from him. When a Christian lies, that's Satan getting control, isn't it? All lie come from Satan. All truth comes from God. If something is true, it's of God. If it's false, it's of Satan, according to the Scripture. Now, if you want to deny that, what you're saying is, I can't know anything. If you can't know anything, blow your brains out. It's over with. Why keep breathing air? You're going to die. Every one of you are dying. You see, the whole thing is absurdity, and it leads to frustrated people, doesn't it? Satan frustrates people. Now, I'm going to agree. That's what truth is. The second thing about truth is it's demonstrable. We can observe it. Everything in God's Word can be demonstrated. The nature of man, the course of man, what he'll do is demonstratable to anybody who wants to look and be honest. He doesn't need even to read the Bible. The only reason he doesn't believe what the Bible says is for one reason. He doesn't want to believe it. Because he wants to believe that he is something that he is not. He wants to believe himself as being the supreme intellect of the universe. He wants to believe himself as being God. He wants to believe himself that he is master of his own fate and captain of his own soul. He wants to believe that. And if he wants to believe it, it's a religious faith. Let's face it, this is a religious faith. Don't tell me you don't believe in religion. Yes, you do. You've got a very strong religion. Motivates your every thinking of being and your actions. Anyway, my point is this. Rules of political science. Law. 1. Every new power of government is a former liberty lost. If you're free to decide where you're going to work, the government doesn't have the power to tell you where you're going to work. The day the government has the power to tell you where you're going to work, you've lost the liberty to decide where you're going to work. Liberty is the inverse of power. When governments increase their power, they do it by taking away your liberty. There's no other way to increase the government power. Every time the government takes a new power, it has taken away a liberty. When government has taken all power, it leaves no liberty. I like that. Power of the government is directly proportional to its size. As a government increases its size, it'll increase its power over people. 3. The size of government is directly proportional to its ability to raise revenues, taxes. You increase the power of the government to tax, you have automatically reduced your liberty. 4. During time of war, governments always increase their political power. 5. At the end of war, no government has ever reduced its political power to pre-war level. That is, it has never returned the liberties taken away during time of war. It's returned some of them, but never returned all of them. 6. War breeds war because the more powerful a government is, the greater propensity of it going to war. Weak governments don't go to war, strong governments do. As you have more and more size of central government, you will have more and more wars. Since 1939, we've had war budgets, we've had drafts and conscriptions always passed by the liberals who keep talking about being doves while they keep putting us into war. It's the Muskies who get us into war. The present draft bill is called the Kennedy bill, put through by Robert Kennedy, Senator Robert Kennedy. And now the new bill, who's supporting the new draft bill? Teddy Kennedy. is the big gun behind the new draft bill, isn't it? While the liberals have keep passing draft bills and getting us into war, they claim conservatives are hawks and that they are doves. No, they are liars. Phony hypocrites are the first magnitude. But they run the schools to get people to believe their lies. That's why you need the schools. Schools are so that people will believe lies. Without schools, people would think. If we took two people of equal intelligence, one went to school and one didn't, which one is going to be able to think? Not the one who went to school. He learned not to think. He learned to read and repeat back. He was like a tape recorder. He receives and turns on a replay, right? The one who didn't go to school has to think. He's got to ponder things out. This is why farmers of 100 years ago were far better economists than college professors today. Simple. They had to use logic. Rather than today, a man gets his doctor's degree when he's able to parrot back accurately the moronic statements that were given to him without thinking for the last 10 years. If he thinks at all and comes up with his own conclusions, he has real problem getting his degree. He's a reactionary. The problem with what I am saying is this. Everyone in this room knows it's true. That's what bothers me. All right, that's what should be bothering. Let's have some lunch, and let's have the grace said now, and then we can go down. Pastor, would you lead us in a word of prayer?